The Florida Historical Society presents Florida Frontiers is made possible in part by the Jessie Ball DuPont Fund and by
The historic Rossiter House Museum and Gardens is in the O'Galley section of Melbourne, Florida. Preserved as it was in the early 20th century, historic tours of the Rossiter House include antiques, artifacts, and family heirlooms, and the 1865 Houston Family Cemetery. The last resident of the home was successful businesswoman and philanthropist Caroline P. Rossiter. The historic Rossiter House Museum and Gardens is available for weddings and other special events.
the Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs, the Florida Council of Arts and Culture, and the state of Florida. In October 2020, the Florida Historical Society presented a virtual annual meeting and symposium. Welcome to Florida Frontiers, presented by the Florida Historical Society. I'm Ben Brotmarkle. As part of the conference, Florida Historical Society President Emily Liska led a conversation with public historian Dr. Peggy McDonald, Dr. Kimberly Wilmot Voss from the University of Central Florida, and Dr. Zohara Simmons from the University of Florida. The panel discussion was called 100 Years of the 19th Amendment, Florida Women Breaking Barriers. The idea of women's suffrage in America goes all the way back to the American Revolution. In a 1776 letter to her husband John, Abigail Adams urged him to remember the ladies in the new code of laws that were being developed. In 1840, American women attempted to make their case for equality at the World Anti-Slavery Convention in London. The Seneca Falls Convention in 1848 was the first to focus exclusively on women's rights. While the state of Florida would not ratify the 19th Amendment until a symbolic vote in 1969, the constitutionally guaranteed right for women to vote became federal law in 1920.
Florida in 1920, at the time of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, had fewer than 1 million residents. So it was the first colony, often overlooked. People look at Virginia and Massachusetts, but as historian Michael Gannon wrote, by the time Jamestown was established, St. Augustine was well into urban renewal. as a Spanish colony, Spain treated Florida as a military outpost. Unlike England, they didn't bring women and children to colonize. They just wanted to protect their interests in the rest of Central and South America and North America from England. So Florida was not populated in the same way as the other early colonies. And at the time of statehood, 1845, so just 3 years before Seneca Falls, Florida was a thriving slave state. It was, at the time of the Civil War, about 51% enslaved, about 51% Black, and about 49% white. And in terms of women, the women were either enslaved, or they were in the position of the slave mistress, or they were in some other form of agricultural work. So Florida was rural, it was agricultural, and you didn't yet have the major centers of activism that you had in the North. Typically, people, well, I'm not going to say people, Elizabeth Taylor, and not that one, wrote a history in the Florida Historical Quarterly, an article that came out in the 1950s about Florida's suffrage movement. And she credited Ella Chamberlain with jumpstarting it in 1892. So a little later than the northern states, but she came from Iowa. And it's interesting because Mary Safford from Orlando was the president later of the Equal Suffrage League of Orlando, and Florida, also president of the Iowa Equal Suffrage League. So there's this Iowa connection, right? Ella Chamberlain moved here in 1892. She really kickstarted the movement with, and this is something that Dr. Voss could discuss, her column in the Tampa Morning Tribune. So she used the power of the pen to push for women's rights. However, her view was that white women should be able to vote. She wrote that no woman should be represented by the votes of the Negro or the alien. So she had an anti-immigrant, anti-Black view. So this is the origins, right, of Florida's suffrage movement, something to keep in mind. The United Daughters of the Confederacy were also entwined, right? So when we look at other examples of suffragists in Florida and across the nation, they were often also members of the United Daughters of the Confederacy, and that's the group that put the Confederate statues all over Florida and all over the South.
Well, on a little bit of a personal note, there are two women on this panel who actually have grandmothers not allowed, who were born into a world of no suffrage, at least for them, and perhaps I'm one of them. And of course, Dr. Simmons, you told me about your grandmother, and she was a great influence on your life. My grandmother was born in Stark, Florida in 1898. I discovered your grandmother was born in 1898, and you have more memories of what she taught you about voting rights than I do. I sadly neglected to ask questions, but if you'll tell us about your personal experience a little bit there.
My grandmother, Rhoda Douglas, who, as you noted, was born in 1898. She was born in Arkansas, but moved to Memphis, Tennessee as a young person. And while many, many Black men and women were unable to vote across the South, and of course, this was one of the reasons that I joined the civil rights movement to try and change that. My grandmother, living in Memphis, Tennessee, had been able to register as soon as women in Tennessee were able to. And she voted in every election and was very adamant about it, and went door to door during all elections trying to get people to commit to vote, going with people to the poll to register, etc. So she had a profound influence on me and the work that I would do as a young adult and later to get voting rights for Black people across the South.
And when we talk about those rights, they were such a long time coming. I know Florida was accused by Susan B. Anthony in 1902 of as the one state that had never stepped up to do anything for the woman's suffrage movement, as she called it. And then, you know, there was activity, as Peggy's already pointed out, Dr. McDonald's already pointed out. And some of that activity was meaningful, other activity maybe not that productive. And some of the Florida women were at odds about the best way to proceed. And there were, and this was years, they would go to the Florida legislature year after year, not exactly that, typically on an every other year schedule as the legislature had in those days. And they would, of course, try to get something done for women's suffrage, at least on the state level, if not beyond. Later on in 1920, there was more activity. I want to see if anybody wants to address any of the specific women, because there were a cadre of them here in Florida. And I think most of you are familiar with them. You start by looking at people like Mayman Jennings, you look at Helen Hunt, and of course, Mary McLeod Bethune. These were all principals either directly in the women's suffrage movement at the time to try to get that 19th Amendment ratified, or certainly later on. You can have an amendment ratified, but you've got to have registered voters who can actually access the polls. So would anybody like to mention that long journey? Yeah, please, Dr. Voss.
I think it's worth mentioning Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, we think of her as an environmentalist, right, who's done so much for Florida, but she went down and testified trying to get suffrage to pass in Florida, right? Another example of a journalist who was trying to do these things. I distinctly remember her writing that no one paid any attention to her or the other women, that probably Peggy knows a little bit better than I do. But she mentioned, going down there in their white gloves and their hats, because that was kind of the agency that you worked within, right? Because being too angry or upset wouldn't help. But I don't think enough attention is paid to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and the fact that she did try to work for suffrage in Florida.
And so, Peggy, would you like to, or would you elaborate on some of the women who you really think made the most impact in Florida?
Mary Safford, based in Orlando, really kind of took off where Ella Chamberlain had stopped. When Ella Chamberlain and her husband left the state after the great freezes of 1894 to 95, wreaked havoc on their citrus crops. So by 1897, she left, and Elizabeth Taylor has written that there was a lull in the movement after that. 1912, the Orlando mayor encouraged all freeholders to register to vote. A group of women went down to register to vote, and the city attorney informed them that they could not because the Florida Constitution prevented women from voting. Well, this led ultimately to Mary Safford, who was an experienced suffragist in Iowa, had been a Unitarian minister, where even to this day, if you think about it, there are not very many female ministers. Against her family's wishes, she became one. So she became the head of the Orlando and then the state Equal Suffrage League. So the focus was from the national, affiliating with the national women's suffrage movement of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, towards the Florida Equal Suffrage Association. And so she was one person who really helped revive the movement. One of the most famous ones for her militancy was Mary Nolan, and she's another example of someone who was affiliated with the United Daughters of the Confederacy and the suffrage movement. She was born in Virginia in 1842 and then moved to Jacksonville, which became a hotbed for suffrage activity. And she was known for being arrested multiple times, once for actually burning one of Woodrow Wilson's speeches in Washington, D.C., and she was the only Florida suffragist to have her imprisonment narrative published. It was published in The Suffragist in 1917. And at the same time, to be in her 70s and to be repeatedly abused during that night of terror, as she wrote about, and to continue to be arrested was notable for Florida. But Mary McLeod Bethune, her activities are overlooked. Ida B. Wells is just starting to get attention in the national suffrage narrative for her refusal to march at the back of the 1913 suffrage parade in Washington, D.C. And she inserted herself between two white women and marched with the Illinois delegation. Meanwhile, in Florida and at the national level, Dr. Bethune was instrumental in protecting not only Black women's right to vote, but also Black men's. She opened her school that became Bethune-Cookman University at night to teach reading classes. And that would allow Black male and female voters to pass the literacy test and vote. She went on her bicycle door to door to collect money for a poll tax fund to help Black voters pay the poll tax. And she established the Florida Federation of Colored Women's Clubs, because the largest organization for women in Florida, the Florida Federation of Women's Clubs, was white only, as most states were segregated by race. So we really can't say enough about Mary McLeod Bethune's efforts during the suffrage movement and her work for civil rights and voting rights. I did leave out Mayman Jennings, who was president of the Florida Federation of Women's Clubs, and in 1915 convinced that 10,000 member organization to support women's suffrage. And they lobbied the Florida legislature to amend the state constitution to allow women to vote and to support the 19th Amendment, known as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, to have an amendment to the US Constitution.
And I think it's remarkable when the Florida legislature was in session when the 19th Amendment came out of Congress and it was ready for ratification. We could have had the historic distinction of being the first state to ratify, or the governor could have called the legislature into session later on. We well may have been the Tennessee of the day, but we certainly would have had the opportunity. And there were a lot of excuses used by our state legislators, many which have been mentioned. And even on the national level, the two Florida senators were certainly in the minority when the 19th Amendment finally passed the Senate, as neither stepped up to vote in favor of that amendment. And certainly a huge disappointment, saying they really supported it, but they did not vote for it, gave reasons that were rather weak, I think, in the eyes of most women suffragists. I'd like to this history is so long, and we're going to try to get back to it before the panel ends, but I want to jump off for a minute and talk about what is almost a movement that I say, and I'm happy to be corrected, that mirrored this movement for the 19th passage of the 19th Amendment and in Florida. And that was the Equal Rights Amendment. It's, like the amendment that it never ends, it's out there. And what is the legal status of it still to this day? And I would like certainly Dr. Voss, who's done some brilliant work in that area, to address the topic.
Thank you. It is very exciting to celebrate 100 years of suffrage, but I think it's important to remember it was only 1923 that women said, well, that's great, we have the right to vote. We like equal rights on a number of legal levels. And it just never, to this day, as you mentioned, has happened. Florida became a very important battleground state in the 1970s. It seemed as though things were going well, that we, kind of like you mentioned, we could have been the Tennessee of the ERA, but we could not get enough support. One of the women I study, Senator Lori Wilson, those of you that know Cocoa Beach, the park that you go to that's very, very beautiful on the beach, she's much more than that. She really was one of the only women in the Florida State House at all to push for the Equal Rights Amendment. And looking back at it, she was fighting for what seems like a small thing nowadays, but back then it was a big deal in the 1970s. And it's also worth mentioning in the 1970s, she ran and won as an independent. So for every election, she had to run against two other parties. It was a significant thing. And things like women in the military, which now, of course, we take for granted, bathroom rights for men and women, right, which we've debated for a while, gay marriage, some of the things that nowadays we should have, we still don't have the ERA.
I want to jump back about a decade, because before the Equal Rights Amendment was so actively on the scene in Florida, it was out there certainly. We're dealing with a broader issue even, and this was the civil rights movement, the movement of the 60s. And it's a time, that we still don't have the Civil Rights Voting Act. And so, Hara, you have quite the stories to tell. You've already told us about your very earliest years and sort of being schooled at your grandmother's knee about the importance of voting. And if you could maybe pick up back in the days when you were at Spelman, and what you did, your personal involvement in the voting rights movement, and particularly your work in the South.
Certainly, thank you. Yes, when we talk about, as my colleagues have noted beautifully, we can focus on 100 years ago when women got the right to vote, or supposedly that Black men got the right to vote with the 15th Amendment. But when we really look at the history of our country, we know that this was not the case. And certainly in my own life, having gone off to Spelman as the first person in my family to get a college education, and being told by my grandmother who raised me, in spite of all that she had shown me in her own life, she said, don't get involved. And I really had not planned to, but once I got to Atlanta, which was at that time a hotbed of student activism, I got involved, and it was marching and sitting in and all of that, and meeting people who were already full-time SNCC people, that I started hearing these horrific stories, particularly from Mississippi.
And Zohara, for the few people who don't know what SNCC is, would you give us the long version?
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
All right, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, known as SNCC, SNCC. When I met a number of the SNCC staff who would come in from Mississippi for meetings and hear that people had been shot, people had their homes bombed, firebombed, all because they tried to register to vote. Well, I was in a state of shock, and I really became angry. And so I decided that I had to go to Mississippi for the Mississippi Freedom Summer Project of 1964. And of course, I had no idea how dangerous it was going to be. And when I got assigned to a place on the southeast side of the state called Laurel, Mississippi, it was so dangerous there. In fact, the leader of the Ku Klux Klan lived there, Sam Bowers, who was involved with a number of killings of Black people in the state. Let me just say, the whole idea behind Mississippi Freedom Summer was that we would have 1,000 college students fan out across the state, and most of whom would be white, to expose to the world the dangers that Black people faced if they even attempted to register. So when I was assigned to Laurel and I was told it was too dangerous for even white volunteers to be sent, and I was one of the few Black volunteers, I became quite terrified of the idea. Nonetheless, having gone there and got a project going and sort of opening up the county, as we said, Jones County, Free Jones County, we won't go into why it's called that, but we did have some 23 volunteers, most of whom were white. And, we were shot at, homes were burned, crosses put on lawns, and our first office firebombed and burned because the fire department would not put it out. The second office firebombed, but thankfully the community were able to put it out. I mean, these were such dangerous times. So when we talk about women who were in the forefront of getting the right to vote, we have to extend it to the 60s, the 50s, and the 60s, when you have people like Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, who was beaten within an inch of her life for trying to register to vote, who became one of the prominent leaders in the state. There were many women across that state and in Alabama who were leading in the struggle to get the right to vote. So we have to understand that for many of us, the right to vote was not guaranteed until the passage of the 1964 Voting Rights Act. And now we see in our current time that even that has been eviscerated, and many of our rights to vote are really now being attacked.
The panel discussion 100 Years of the 19th Amendment, Florida Women Breaking Barriers, was presented as part of the Florida Historical Society virtual annual meeting and symposium in October 2020. You can see the entire conversation at myfloridahistory.org. You've been watching Florida Frontiers presented by the Florida Historical Society. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ben Brotemarkle. The Florida Historical Society presents Florida Frontiers is made possible in part by the Jessie Ball DuPont Fund and by
The historic Rossiter House Museum and Gardens is in the O'Galley section of Melbourne, Florida. Preserved as it was in the early 20th century, historic tours of the Rossiter House include antiques, artifacts, and family heirlooms, and the 1865 Houston Family Cemetery. The last resident of the home was successful businesswoman and philanthropist Caroline P. Rossiter. The historic Rossiter House Museum and Gardens is available for weddings and other special events.
The Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs, the Florida Council of Arts and Culture, and the state of Florida.